What's up, everyone? Tonight, we're diving deep into the dark, fascinating world of 16th century medicine, where survival was more about luck than knowledge, and where the cure might just kill you faster than the disease itself. You probably wouldn't survive this. So before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and current time. I love seeing where in the world you're joining me for this journey through history's most questionable medical practices. Now turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background sound, and let's begin our journey tonight. You're standing in the cobblestone streets of a 16th century European town, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and something less pleasant that you can't quite identify. The morning mist clings to the narrow buildings like a gray shroud, and you can hear the distant toll of church bells cutting through the fog. Your leather shoes click against the wet stones as you make your way to the market square, but something feels wrong. The usual chatter of merchants and the clatter of carts is absent, replaced by an eerie silence that makes your skin crawl. Then you see him. A figure emerges from the mist like something from a nightmare, dressed entirely in black leather from head to toe. His face is completely hidden behind a mask with a long, curved beak that extends nearly a foot from where his nose should be. Two round glass lenses stare at you like the eyes of some monstrous bird, and you can hear the soft wheeze of his breathing echoing from within the hollow beak. This is a plague doctor, and his arrival in your town means only one thing. Death has come calling. The plague doctor moves with deliberate, almost ceremonial steps, his long black cloak trailing behind him like the wings of a raven. In one gloved hand, he carries a leather satchel filled with mysterious remedies, and in the other, a long wooden cane that he uses to examine patients without getting too close. You can't help but wonder if he looks as ridiculous to the dying as he does to you. Because let's be honest, that beak makes him look like he's about to perform in some twisted medieval theater production. As he approaches, you catch a whiff of the aromatic herbs and spices packed into his beak mask. Rosemary, thyme, and cloves mixed with something sharper, more medicinal. The theory was that these pleasant scents would protect him from the bad air that physicians believed caused plague. Of course, they had no idea about bacteria or viruses, so they were essentially fighting an invisible enemy with potpourri. Still, there's something oddly comforting about the familiar herb scents in this moment of terror. The plague doctor stops before a house marked with a red cross, the universal symbol that plague had entered this dwelling. You watch as he raps his cane against the wooden door 3 times, a sound that echoes through the empty street like a death knell. The door creaks open, and a woman appears, her face gaunt and eyes red from weeping. She gestures toward the upper floors, and you realize that somewhere above, someone is dying. Historians still debate whether plague doctors were truly effective or simply expensive scarecrows in fancy costumes. What we do know is that they were among the first public health officials, appointed by cities to treat plague victims regardless of their ability to pay. Many were actually second-rate physicians, or even complete novices who took the job because no one else would. The mortality rate among plague doctors was surprisingly low, not because of their protective gear, but likely because they rarely got close enough to their patients to catch anything. You follow at a safe distance as the plague doctor enters the house. Through the open windows, you can hear him speaking in Latin, his voice muffled by the beak mask. He's reciting prayers and incantations while examining the patient with his long cane, prodding and poking from as far away as possible. The irony isn't lost on you that in an age where human touch was often the only comfort available to the dying, doctors literally went to great lengths to avoid any physical contact. The plague doctor emerges after what feels like hours, carrying a small vial of dark liquid, probably some concoction of herbs, mercury, and crushed gems that cost more than most people earned in a year. He hands it to the woman with explicit instructions delivered in a voice that sounds like it's coming from inside a cave. The treatment is almost certainly useless, but it represents hope in a time when hope was in desperately short supply. As the mysterious figure disappears back into the mist, you're left with a profound sense of how precarious life was in the 16th century. These plague doctors, ridiculous as they may seem to us now, were humanity's first attempt at organized medical response to epidemic disease. They may not have understood germs, but they understood that someone needed to show up, even if that someone looked like a leather-clad bird with a medicine bag. The town gradually returns to its muted activity, but the memory of that haunting figure lingers. You realize that in a world where death could arrive as suddenly as morning mist, even the most bizarre attempts at medicine provided a strange comfort. The plague doctor's visit reminds you that throughout history, humans have always sought ways to fight the darkness, even when armed with nothing more than herbs, hope, and a really impressive costume. You're seated on a wooden stool in a dimly lit chamber, the musty scent of old parchment and dried herbs filling your nostrils. Flickering candlelight dances across stone walls, casting long shadows that seem to writhe and breathe with each flame's movement. The physician before you wears a long, dark robe that rustles softly as he moves, and his weathered hands hold a peculiar brass instrument that gleams like liquid gold in the amber light. You can hear the gentle drip of water somewhere in the distance, a rhythmic sound that would be soothing if not for what's about to happen. The doctor's assistant approaches carrying a ceramic bowl and several metal instruments that catch the light with an ominous gleam. You notice the bowl is already stained with dark patches that you prefer not to think about too deeply. The physician examines you with eyes that have seen countless patients, his gaze moving methodically from your face to your hands, noting things you can't even imagine. He nods sagely, as if your very appearance has revealed profound medical secrets that only he can interpret. "Ah yes," he murmurs in a voice like aged wine. "Your blood runs too hot, too thick. We must restore balance to your humors." He speaks with the confidence of someone who has never been wrong, even though you suspect he's wrong about pretty much everything. The medieval medical theory of the four humors dominated European medicine for over 1,000 years, teaching that all illness resulted from an imbalance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. It was elegantly simple, completely logical, and almost entirely incorrect. The physician selects a small, sharp blade called a phleem, its edge honed to razor sharpness. He examines your arm with the concentration of an artist preparing to create a masterpiece, feeling for the pulse beneath your skin with gentle, practiced fingers. The warmth of his touch is oddly comforting, even as your mind races with thoughts of what's coming next. You can smell the metallic scent of previous treatments lingering on his instruments, mixed with the aromatic oils he uses to clean them. Bloodletting was the aspirin of the medieval world, prescribed for everything from headaches to heartbreak, from fever to depression. Physicians believed that draining blood would eliminate the corrupted humors, causing illness and restore natural balance to the body. The practice was so universal that barbers eventually took over much of the trade, which is why the traditional barber pole features red and white stripes representing blood and bandages. Nothing says come in for a trim quite like advertising your side business in medieval phlebotomy. The physician makes a small incision in your arm, and you watch as dark red blood begins to flow into the waiting bowl. The sensation is strange rather than painful, a warm wetness that seems to carry away tension along with the blood. He monitors the flow carefully, occasionally checking the color and consistency as if reading prophecies in the crimson stream. The sound of blood dripping into the ceramic bowl creates a gentle rhythm that mingles with your slowing heartbeat. As the bowl fills, you begin to feel lightheaded, but not unpleasantly so. The physician watches your face intently, looking for signs that enough blood has been drawn. There's no precise measurement, no scientific calculation, just the accumulated wisdom of centuries of bloodletting practitioners who believed they could see health returning to their patients' complexions. You wonder if the slight euphoria you're feeling is actual healing or simply the result of mild blood loss. But the physician seems pleased with your progress. Historians still debate whether bloodletting ever actually helped anyone, or if its popularity persisted simply because patients who survived felt grateful to their physicians. Some modern researchers suggest that in very specific cases, such as certain types of blood disorders, bloodletting might have provided genuine relief. However, for the vast majority of medieval patients, the practice probably did more harm than good, weakening already sick bodies and sometimes introducing infections through unsterile instruments. The physician applies pressure to stop the bleeding, then wraps your arm with clean linen bandages that smell faintly of lavender. His movements are gentle and efficient, the result of countless repetitions of this same ritual. You notice how his fingers work with automatic precision, tying knots that will hold securely without cutting off circulation. There's something almost meditative about watching him work. The way his hands move with practiced certainty in a world where so little was truly certain. As you sit quietly, allowing your body to adjust to the blood loss, the physician explains that you should return in 3 days for another treatment. He speaks of the importance of maintaining humoral balance, of watching for signs that your blood is becoming too thick or too thin. His words wash over you like a gentle stream, full of medieval medical wisdom that sounds almost poetic in its wrongness. You realize that in a world without real understanding of disease, bloodletting offered something precious, the feeling that something was being done. The curious thing about bloodletting is that it sometimes seemed to work, not because it actually cured diseases, but because it provided a dramatic, ritualistic response to illness. Patients felt that their suffering was being acknowledged, that ancient wisdom was being applied to their problems. The ceremony of bloodletting, with its special instruments and solemn procedures, created a sense of medical intervention that was psychologically powerful even when physically useless. You leave the physician's chamber feeling oddly peaceful, your wrapped arm a badge of having undergone proper medical treatment. The evening air feels cool against your skin, and you notice colors seeming slightly more vivid, sounds slightly more musical. Whether this is the result of restored humoral balance or simply the natural high that comes from surviving any medieval medical procedure, you can't be sure. What you do know is that for better or worse, you've experienced one of history's most persistent medical traditions, and you're still breathing to tell the tale. You push open the heavy wooden door of the apothecary shop, and immediately your senses are overwhelmed by a symphony of scents so complex they seem to tell stories of distant lands and ancient secrets. The air is thick with the musty sweetness of dried roses, the sharp bite of crushed peppercorns, and something indefinably exotic that makes your nose tingle. Sunlight filters through small, diamond-paned windows, casting geometric patterns across shelves lined with hundreds of glass vials, ceramic pots, and mysterious containers that seem to glow with their own inner light. Behind the counter stands the apothecary himself, a man whose appearance suggests he's sampled a few too many of his own products. His wild gray hair seems to have a life of its own, and his eyes twinkle with the kind of mischief that makes you wonder if he's a healer or a con artist. Probably both, if we're being honest. He wears a stained leather apron over robes that have seen better decades, and his fingers are permanently darkened with the residue of countless ground herbs and powdered minerals. The shelves around you are a cabinet of curiosities that would make modern pharmacists weep with laughter. Jars labeled unicorn horn sit next to bottles of mermaid tears, while containers of dragon's blood share space with powdered pearls and crushed emeralds. The apothecary notices your amazement and chuckles, a sound like autumn leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. First time in a proper medicine shop, he asks, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who genuinely loves his work, however misguided it might be. You approach a display case filled with what appear to be precious stones, each one carefully labeled with its supposed medicinal properties. Sapphires for mental clarity, rubies for strength, diamonds for invincibility. The apothecary explains that these aren't just decorative items. but powerful medicines that work by transmitting their essential qualities directly into the human body. It's like medieval Instagram wellness culture, but with actual gems instead of overpriced supplements. A wealthy merchant enters the shop, his silk robes rustling with the sound of prosperity. He requests a remedy for his wife's melancholy, and you watch as the apothecary begins preparing an elaborate concoction. First, he measures out a portion of ground unicorn horn, which you're fairly certain is actually powdered narwhal tusk that has traveled thousands of miles to reach this little shop. The medieval belief in unicorn horn as a cure-all was so strong that narwhal tusks were literally worth their weight in gold. The apothecary adds powdered pearls to the mixture, explaining that their lustrous beauty will restore his wife's natural radiance. He grinds the pearls with a mortar and pestle made from black marble, the rhythmic scraping sound creating a meditative rhythm that seems to hypnotize everyone in the shop. The cost of this remedy would feed a peasant family for months, but the merchant pays without question, such as his faith in the apothecary's skill. Next comes the most expensive ingredient, bezoar stones, which are actually masses of undigested material found in the stomachs of animals, particularly goats. The apothecary treats these with the reverence of a priest handling holy relics, explaining that they can neutralize any poison and cure virtually any ailment. Historians still debate whether bezoar stones had any actual medical value, or if their reputation was based entirely on their rarity and expense. What we do know is that they were among the most prized possessions of European nobility. As you browse the shop, you discover containers filled with less glamorous but equally expensive remedies. There's a jar of mummy powder, made from ground Egyptian mummies, which was believed to cure everything from headaches to heart problems. The irony that people were literally consuming the dead to preserve their own lives seems lost on everyone except you. The apothecary explains that authentic mummy powder is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain, as if supply chain issues were somehow a new problem. The scent of burning incense draws your attention to a corner where the apothecary is preparing a remedy for a young woman suffering from what he calls female hysteria. The treatment involves a complex mixture of herbs, minerals, and animal products that he burns to create aromatic smoke. The patient inhales deeply, her eyes closing as if the very act of breathing the expensive fumes is healing her. The placebo effect was clearly alive and well in the 16th century, dressed up in exotic ingredients and ceremonial preparation. You notice that many of the remedies share certain common ingredients: expensive spices from distant lands, rare minerals, and substances that are difficult to obtain. This wasn't entirely accidental. The apothecary's reputation depended partly on the dramatic nature of his treatments and partly on their cost. In a world where medicine was more art than science, expensive ingredients conveyed both mystique and efficacy. If it cost a fortune, it must be powerful. The shop gradually fills with the soft murmur of consultation as other customers arrive, seeking remedies for various ailments. You listen to the apothecary's explanations, each one delivered with the confidence of absolute certainty. He speaks of the correspondences between celestial bodies and human organs, of the signatures written by God in the shapes of healing plants, of the sympathetic connections between like substances. His worldview is completely wrong by modern standards, but it forms a coherent, beautiful system that provided comfort and hope to desperate people. As you prepare to leave, the apothecary offers you a small vial of aqua vitae, a mysterious golden liquid that supposedly grants long life and perfect health. The liquid catches the light like liquid sunlight, and you can't help but admire the artistry involved in creating something so visually appealing. Whether it works or not, you think, at least it's beautiful. And sometimes, in a world where death could arrive without warning, beauty might be medicine enough. You find yourself in a physician's private chamber at dawn. The air still cool and sweet with the scent of dew-dampened herbs growing in window boxes. Golden morning light streams through leaded glass, casting rainbow prisms across a collection of glass flasks that seem to glow like precious amber. The physician, a dignified man with silver-streaked beard and knowing eyes, gestures toward a peculiar chair beside his desk. "Please, make yourself comfortable," he says, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who has spent decades studying the mysteries of human health. On the desk before you sits an impressive array of glass vessels, each one designed to hold and display liquid in the most flattering light possible. These are urine flasks, and they're about to become the centerpiece of your medical examination. The physician explains that urine is nature's perfect diagnostic tool, a golden window into the body's inner workings that reveals everything from your emotional state to your likelihood of surviving the coming winter. It's like having a crystal ball, except it's filled with something considerably less mystical. The morning ritual begins as you provide a sample in a beautifully crafted glass vessel that feels surprisingly warm in your hands. The physician accepts it with the reverence of a priest receiving holy water, holding it up to the light where it catches the golden rays streaming through the window. He studies the color with the intensity of an artist examining a masterpiece, noting subtle variations in hue that supposedly reveal the state of your internal organs. "Ah, I see amber with hints of gold," he murmurs, swirling the flask gently. "Your liver is working well, but there's a slight cloudiness that suggests some heat in the blood." He continues his examination, checking the consistency, the clarity, and even the way the liquid moves within the glass. Medieval physicians believed they could diagnose everything from pregnancy to impending death simply by observing these characteristics. The practice was called uroscopy, and it was considered one of the most sophisticated medical techniques of the age. The physician brings the flask closer to his nose, inhaling deeply as if savoring a fine wine. He nods approvingly, explaining that the scent reveals information about your diet, your emotions, and the balance of your internal humors. Sweet smells indicate an excess of blood, while sharp, acrid odors suggest problems with yellow bile. You watch his face as he processes this olfactory information, his expression serious and contemplative, as if he's reading a complex manuscript written in aromatic code. Then comes the moment you've been dreading. The physician takes a small sip of your urine, rolling it around on his tongue like a sommelier tasting vintage wine. His face remains professionally neutral, but you can't help wondering what career path leads someone to become a professional urine taster. The practice was considered essential to proper diagnosis, as the taste supposedly revealed subtle imbalances that sight and smell might miss. Medieval medical schools actually taught students to recognize dozens of different flavor profiles in urine. Historians still debate whether uroscopy was complete nonsense or if experienced physicians could actually glean useful information from urine examination. Modern medicine has revealed that urine can indeed indicate certain health conditions, though not nearly as many as medieval doctors believed. The color, odor, and other characteristics can suggest dehydration, infections, or metabolic disorders. However, the elaborate interpretive system of medieval uroscopy, with its complex charts and mystical correspondences, was mostly elaborate guesswork dressed up as science. The physician records his observations in a leather-bound journal, his quills scratching softly against parchment as he notes the time of day, the weather conditions, and your general appearance. He explains that urine collected at different times reveals different aspects of health, and that the phases of the moon can affect the reliability of the diagnosis. The morning sample is considered most accurate, as it represents the body's natural state after a night of rest and purification. As he works, you notice a large chart hanging on the wall behind him, covered with illustrations of different urine colors and their supposed meanings. There are at least 20 different shades, ranging from pale yellow to deep amber to alarming red, each one corresponding to specific medical conditions. The chart is beautiful in its way, like a medieval color wheel designed for the most unusual of purposes. It represents centuries of accumulated wisdom, even if that wisdom was largely incorrect. The physician concludes his examination by consulting several thick volumes that contain the collected knowledge of generations of uroscopy practitioners. He cross-references your symptoms with the characteristics of your urine, muttering Latin phrases under his breath as he works through the diagnostic process. The ritual has a hypnotic quality, the soft rustle of turning pages mixing with the gentle scratching of his quill as he formulates his conclusions. Finally, he looks up with a satisfied smile. "Your constitution is fundamentally sound," he announces, "though I recommend avoiding cold foods and taking regular exercise to prevent an accumulation of phlegm." He prescribes a series of dietary modifications and herbal remedies, all based on what he's learned from examining your bodily fluids. The consultation concludes with him washing his hands in a basin of rose water, the floral scent helping to cleanse both his palms and his palate. As you leave the physician's chamber, you carry with you a strange sense of having been thoroughly examined, even though the actual diagnostic techniques were completely unreliable. There's something oddly comforting about the attention to detail, the careful observation, and the scholarly approach to understanding your health. Even if the science was wrong, the dedication to patient care was remarkably sophisticated for its time. You settle into a comfortable chair in a medieval physician's study, where the warm glow of beeswax candles creates dancing shadows on walls lined with ancient texts. The air carries the gentle scent of parchment and dried lavender, mixed with something faintly medicinal that makes you think of monastery gardens after rain. The physician before you is preparing to explain the very foundation of medical knowledge, a theory so elegant and logical that it dominated European medicine for over 1,500 years, despite being almost completely wrong. "Tell me," the physician begins, his voice soft as velvet, "do you ever wonder why some people are naturally cheerful while others seem perpetually melancholy? Why some are quick to anger while others remain calm as still water?" His fingers trace patterns on a beautifully illustrated manuscript spread across his oak desk, the colors still vibrant after centuries of careful preservation. You lean forward, drawn into his explanation of the four humors, a medical theory that made perfect sense in a world where everything was believed to exist in divine balance. The physician points to an intricate diagram showing the human body as a microcosm of the universe itself. Four fundamental substances flow through your veins like rivers through a landscape: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor corresponds to one of the classical elements: blood to air, phlegm to water, yellow bile to fire, and black bile to earth. The theory suggests that your personality, your health, even your destiny are all determined by the unique mixture of these four substances coursing through your body. Consider blood. The physician continues, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone who has explained this countless times. Warm and moist like spring air. Those with an abundance of blood are sanguine, optimistic, social, passionate. He describes how sanguine people are natural leaders, quick to laugh and love, but also prone to excess and impulsivity. It's like an ancient personality test that came with its own built-in medical treatment plan, though probably about as scientifically accurate as your horoscope. The discussion turns to phlegm, that cold and moist humor associated with winter and water. Phlegmatic people are calm, reliable, and unflappable, the kind of individuals you'd want managing your finances or steering your ship through a storm. They're also supposedly slow to action and emotion, preferring contemplation to confrontation. The physician explains how an excess of phlegm leads to sluggishness and depression, requiring warming treatments to restore balance. Yellow bile brings heat and dryness, the fiery humor of summer that creates choleric personalities. These are the ambitious, decisive people who become generals and merchants, but who also struggle with anger and impatience. The physician describes how choleric individuals burn bright and hot, achieving great things but often burning themselves out in the process. You can almost feel the heat radiating from his description, as if yellow bile were somehow contagious through mere discussion. Finally, there's black bile, cold and dry as autumn earth, creating melancholic temperaments. These are the artists, poets, and philosophers, blessed with deep sensitivity and creativity, but cursed with sadness and introspection. The physician speaks of melancholy with particular reverence, noting that many of history's greatest thinkers were dominated by black bile. It's the humor of genius and madness, walking hand in hand through the darker corridors of human experience. Historians still debate whether the four humors theory provided any genuine medical benefit, or if it persisted simply because it offered a comprehensive explanation for human behavior and illness. What's fascinating is how the theory influenced not just medicine, but literature, art, and social understanding. Shakespeare's characters are clearly based on humoral types, and medieval art is full of symbolic references to the four temperaments. The physician demonstrates how diagnosis works by examining your complexion, feeling your pulse, and observing your behavior. Pale skin suggests too much phlegm, while a ruddy complexion indicates excess blood. A quick temper points to yellow bile, while prolonged sadness suggests black bile dominance. The diagnostic process feels almost mystical, as if he's reading your soul through physical signs that supposedly reveal your inner nature. Treatment involves rebalancing the humors through diet, exercise, and lifestyle changes. Hot, dry foods to counter excess phlegm. Cooling remedies for too much yellow bile. Warming spices for melancholic dispositions. The physician explains how each season brings its own humoral challenges, requiring constant attention to maintain perfect balance. It's like having a personal trainer, nutritionist, and therapist all rolled into one medieval package deal. You learn that the four humors theory wasn't just medical doctrine, but a complete worldview that connected human health to cosmic harmony. The same forces that govern the movement of planets and the changing of seasons were believed to flow through human bodies, making medicine part of a grand universal design. Every illness was seen as a disruption of this cosmic balance, requiring not just physical treatment, but spiritual and psychological healing as well. The physician concludes by noting that true health isn't the absence of any particular humor, but rather the perfect balance of all four. He speaks of the ideal temperament as a harmonious blend that allows for courage without recklessness, wisdom without melancholy, passion without excess, and calm without stagnation. It's a beautiful vision of human perfection, even if the underlying science was completely imaginary. As you absorb this ancient wisdom, you're struck by how the four humors theory provided something that modern medicine sometimes lacks: a holistic understanding of the connection between mind and body, personality and health. While we now know that bile doesn't actually determine temperament, there's something appealing about a medical system that treated patients as complete human beings rather than collections of symptoms to be managed. You stand at the threshold of a medieval surgeon's workshop, where the acrid scent of cauterizing irons mingles with the earthy smell of sawdust scattered across rough wooden floors. The morning light filters through small windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits above a collection of metal instruments that gleam with the cold beauty of well-maintained steel. Your heart pounds as you realize that in this time and place, surgery is less medical procedure and more trial by ordeal, where speed matters more than precision and prayers are considered as essential as scalpels. The surgeon before you is a stocky man with powerful hands and arms developed from years of wrestling with unwilling patients. His leather apron is stained with the evidence of countless procedures, and his eyes hold the peculiar mixture of compassion and resigned pragmatism that comes from regularly performing miracles with medieval tools. He's explaining that the leg wound you've sustained requires immediate attention, and in a world without anesthesia, immediate means right now, whether you're ready or not. Two burly assistants position themselves on either side of you. Their job, to hold you absolutely still during the procedure. Their grip is firm, but not unkind. And you can see in their faces the sympathy of men who have witnessed this ritual hundreds of times. One of them places a leather bit between your teeth, explaining that it will give you something to bite down on and prevent you from accidentally severing your tongue. It tastes of salt and previous patient's fear, which is exactly as appetizing as it sounds. The surgeon selects his instruments with the care of a craftsman, choosing the perfect tool for a delicate task. His knives are sharp enough to cut through flesh like butter. His bone saw is designed for efficiency rather than comfort. In the 16th century, surgical success was measured not by precision, but by speed. The faster a limb could be amputated, the better the patient's chances of surviving shock and blood loss. The record for leg amputation was allegedly under 2 minutes, though you really hope your surgeon isn't trying to break any speed records today. Historians still debate whether 16th century surgery was primarily effective treatment or elaborate torture. But what's certain is that survival rates were shockingly low by modern standards. Most patients died not from the surgery itself, but from subsequent infections, which were poorly understood and virtually untreatable. The concept of sterile technique was centuries away, so surgeons operated with the same tools they used to eat their breakfast, often without washing their hands between patients. The procedure begins with the surgeon making quick, confident cuts through skin and muscle. His movements are surprisingly graceful, like a dancer who has performed the same routine countless times. You focus on the rhythm of his work, the soft scraping sound of metal against bone, the gentle murmur of Latin prayers from the assistants. Pain floods through your system like fire, but there's something almost hypnotic about the surgeon's concentration, the way he works with absolute focus despite your involuntary struggles. The most remarkable thing about medieval surgery wasn't its brutality, but its occasional success. Some surgeons developed genuine skill through sheer repetition, learning to read the subtle signs of blood flow and tissue damage that spelled the difference between life and death. They discovered techniques for controlling bleeding, methods for cleaning wounds, and ways to encourage healing that wouldn't be formally understood for centuries. Trial and error, when multiplied by thousands of desperate cases, sometimes produced genuine wisdom. Your surgeon works with remarkable efficiency, his hands moving through the familiar sequence of cutting, clamping, and stitching that he's performed so many times it's become second nature. He explains each step in a calm, steady voice, as if discussing the weather rather than removing infected tissue from your leg. His confidence is oddly reassuring, even though you're fairly certain that confidence and competence aren't necessarily the same thing in 16th century medicine. The workshop around you tells the story of surgical innovation born from necessity. Crude instruments hang from wooden pegs, each one representing some surgeon's attempt to solve a specific problem. There are bone drills for trepanation, forceps for extracting arrows, and curved needles for stitching wounds that seem impossibly difficult to close. Every tool represents countless experiments, failures, and occasional miraculous successes that slowly advance the art of healing. As the procedure continues, you notice other patients waiting their turn, some sitting quietly while others pace nervously around the room. There's a strange camaraderie among people facing surgery without anesthesia, a shared understanding that you're all about to endure something that will either cure you or kill you. The surgeon's apprentice moves among them, offering sips of wine and words of encouragement that sound practiced but sincere. The most surprising aspect of medieval surgery was its psychological sophistication. Surgeons understood that a patient's mental state directly affected their chances of survival, so they developed elaborate rituals designed to inspire confidence and calm. They spoke in authoritative voices, used impressive instruments, and performed their procedures with ceremonial precision that helped patients believe in the possibility of healing. Sometimes belief, was the most powerful medicine available. The surgeon completes his work with a series of careful stitches, his needle moving through flesh with the precision of an embroiderer working on fine silk. He explains that the wound must be kept clean and dry, though his understanding of infection is limited to the observation that some wounds heal better than others. The final step involves applying a mixture of herbs and honey that actually does have some antimicrobial properties, though more by luck than design. As the procedure concludes, you're struck by the surgeon's genuine concern for your welfare. Despite the primitive conditions and brutal techniques, there's real compassion in his care, a dedication to healing that transcends the limitations of his knowledge. He may not understand bacteria or proper sterilization, but he understands human suffering and the sacred responsibility of trying to alleviate it, even when the tools available are woefully inadequate. You step through the wooden gate of a monastery garden, where the morning mist clings to carefully tended beds like nature's own blessing. The air is alive with the gentle hum of bees and the soft whisper of wind through leaves that seem to shimmer with their own inner light. Stone pathways wind between raised beds where monks have cultivated both salvation and medicine for centuries, their brown robes moving like gentle shadows among plants that hold the power to heal or kill, depending on who's doing the picking. Brother Augustine greets you with the serene smile of someone who has spent decades conversing with both God and green growing things. His hands are permanently stained with plant juices, and he carries the earthy scent of someone who spends more time with herbs than humans. "Welcome to our pharmacy," he says, gesturing toward beds that contain more concentrated healing power than any modern medicine cabinet. Though to be fair, they also contain enough poison to eliminate half the village, which really puts the care in healthcare. The garden is laid out with a mathematical precision that medieval monks brought to everything, from illuminated manuscripts to crop rotation. Each bed is dedicated to specific types of healing plants, organized according to both practical use and theological significance. Here grow the vulnerary herbs for wounds. They're the febrifuge plants for fevers, and in a carefully guarded section, the more dangerous specimens that require both expertise and prayer to use safely. It's like a medieval CVS, except everything is organic, and some of the products might actually turn you into a toad. Brother Augustine leads you first to the bed of common healing herbs, where chamomile spreads its daisy-like flowers like tiny suns across dark earth. He explains how these gentle plants form the foundation of monastic medicine, their mild actions suitable for treating everything from insomnia to indigestion. The scent of chamomile is particularly strong in the morning air, sweet and apple-like, creating an almost hypnotic atmosphere that makes you understand why it's been used for relaxation for thousands of years. You bend closer to examine lavender plants whose purple spikes release their distinctive fragrance at the slightest touch. The monk demonstrates how to harvest the flowers at just the right moment, when their essential oils are most concentrated. Medieval physicians believed that the timing of harvest was crucial to a plant's medicinal power, with some herbs best gathered at dawn, others at midnight, and still others during specific phases of the moon. It was botanical astrology, and, surprisingly, some of it actually worked. The monastery garden represents one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated approaches to healthcare. Monastic communities preserved and expanded upon classical knowledge of herbal medicine, creating detailed herbals that documented the preparation and use of hundreds of healing plants. The famous Benedictine monastery of St. Gall had a garden plan that included over 40 different medicinal plants, each one carefully positioned according to its growing requirements and frequency of use. These monks were basically running the world's first research hospitals, with significantly better bedside manner. Historians still debate whether monastic medicine was more effective than secular practice, but there's no question that monastery gardens preserved crucial knowledge during the Dark Ages. Monks copied and translated ancient texts, conducted careful observations of plant effects, and developed standardized preparations that could be replicated across different communities. They were the first to establish something resembling quality control in medieval pharmacy, though their definition of quality sometimes included theological considerations. Brother Augustine shows you the preparation area, where herbs are dried in carefully controlled conditions to preserve their medicinal properties. Bundles of plants hang from wooden beams like aromatic chandeliers, filling the air with a complex symphony of scents. He explains how different drying methods affect the potency of various herbs, and how proper storage can maintain their effectiveness for months or even years. The attention to detail is remarkable, suggesting that medieval monks understood far more about plant chemistry than they're often given credit for. You move on to examine some of the more exotic plants that have made their way to this northern monastery through extensive trade networks. Here grows ginger from distant Asian spires, cinnamon bark from tropical islands, and pepper that was once literally worth its weight in silver. The monk explains how these expensive imports are reserved for the most serious conditions, their rarity making them seem almost magical in their healing power. Medieval people understood the placebo effect intuitively, even if they couldn't name it. The garden's most carefully guarded section contains plants that blur the line between medicine and poison. Foxglove with its beautiful purple flowers and deadly cardiac glycosides. Belladonna with berries so tempting and so lethal that they've inspired centuries of cautionary tales. Mandrake root, which medieval physicians believed screamed when pulled from the earth and could cure or curse depending on how it was prepared. Brother Augustine handles these plants with the reverence due to something that contains both healing and destruction in equal measure. As you walk among the healing plants, you're struck by how this garden represents a complete medical system based on centuries of careful observation and experimentation. While medieval monks may not have understood the chemical compounds that made their remedies effective, they developed sophisticated methods for identifying, preparing, and administering plant medicines. Many modern pharmaceuticals are simply concentrated or synthesized versions of compounds that monks were using 1,000 years ago. The morning light grows stronger, illuminating the garden like a natural cathedral where the divine and the practical meet in perfect harmony. Brother Augustine concludes your tour by offering you a cup of herbal tea made from plants grown in this very garden. The warm liquid carries the essence of chamomile, mint, and honey, creating a sense of peace that seems to radiate from your core outward. Whether it's the herbs or simply the tranquil setting, you feel a deep connection to generations of healers who found their medicine growing freely in the earth. You find yourself standing in a dusty town square where the sound of a bell clanging draws a growing crowd toward a makeshift stage. The afternoon sun beats down on cobblestones that seem to radiate heat like a medieval frying pan, and the air shimmers with the kind of anticipation that suggests either entertainment or disaster is about to unfold. At the center of the commotion stands a man whose muscular arms and leather apron mark him as someone who works with his hands, though the collection of metal instruments laid out on his table suggests his particular trade might be more painful than most people would prefer. This is Master Willem, the traveling tooth puller, and his arrival in town has generated the kind of excitement usually reserved for royal visits or public executions. His voice booms across the square as he announces his services, promising to extract troublesome teeth with minimal pain and maximum spectacle. A small band of musicians accompanies his pitch, their lively melodies creating a festive atmosphere that seems oddly inappropriate for what is essentially street dentistry. You can't help but wonder if the music is meant to attract customers or drown out the screaming. The tooth puller's stage is decorated with strings of extracted teeth, like grotesque party decorations that catch the sunlight and cast tiny dancing shadows. Each tooth represents a previous patient's suffering transformed into Willem's professional credentials. He explains that these dental trophies demonstrate his skill and experience, though you suspect they might have the opposite effect on potential customers. It's like advertising your restaurant with a display of food poisoning statistics but somehow people keep lining up. A nervous merchant approaches the stage, one hand pressed to his swollen jaw, his face twisted with the kind of pain that makes rational decision-making nearly impossible. Willem examines the affected tooth with surprising gentleness, his thick fingers probing with the delicacy of someone who understands that pain has already done enough damage. He explains his diagnosis to the crowd in terms that mix medical authority with showmanship, turning a simple dental extraction into a dramatic performance worthy of the theater. Medieval dentistry was essentially public entertainment with therapeutic side effects. Tooth pullers traveled from town to town, combining medical treatment with circus-style spectacle to attract customers and mask the brutal reality of their procedures. The music, costumes, and theatrical presentations weren't just marketing gimmicks. They were primitive forms of psychological anesthesia, designed to distract patients from pain that had no other relief available. Willem prepares his instruments with ceremonial flourish, each tool polished to mirror brightness and arranged with the precision of a priest preparing for Mass. His extraction forceps are works of art in their own right, forged by skilled metalworkers and designed for maximum leverage with minimum tissue damage. He explains the properties of each instrument to the crowd, building suspense while also demonstrating his professional expertise. The whole performance has the quality of a magic show, except the magic involves removing body parts. Historians still debate whether medieval tooth pullers were legitimate medical practitioners or elaborate con artists, but the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Many developed genuine skill through constant practice, learning to read the subtle signs that distinguished extractable teeth from hopeless cases. Others were little more than strong men with fancy tools, relying on brute force and wishful thinking to separate patients from both their teeth and their money. The extraction begins with Willem positioning the patient in a specially designed chair that allows for optimal leverage and crowd visibility. Two assistants hold the merchant steady while Willem applies his forceps with the confidence of someone who has performed this procedure thousands of times. The actual extraction happens quickly, accompanied by a sound that you'll probably hear in your nightmares for years to come, followed by triumphant music that transforms agony into applause. The extracted tooth is held aloft like a trophy, blood-stained and surprisingly large in the afternoon sunlight. Willem displays it to the cheering crowd before adding it to his collection, another victory in humanity's ongoing war against dental disease. The merchant, despite his obvious pain, manages a weak smile as he realizes his torment is finally over. Sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease, but when the disease involves constant agony, even brutal cures start to look appealing. What's remarkable about medieval tooth pulling isn't its primitive techniques, but its social function as community entertainment. These public extractions served multiple purposes. They provided necessary medical services, created shared experiences that bonded communities together, and offered dramatic proof that human suffering could be overcome through courage and skill. The combination of medicine and theater made painful procedures more bearable for patients and more meaningful for observers. As the crowd disperses, you notice that several other people are now examining their own teeth with worried expressions, inspired by Willem's dramatic presentation to consider their own dental problems. The tooth puller's performance has awakened awareness of oral health issues that might otherwise have been ignored until they became unbearable. Sometimes the best medicine is simply convincing people to seek treatment before their problems become life-threatening emergencies. Willem packs his instruments with the same care he used to display them, each tool wrapped in soft leather and stored in a custom-fitted case that suggests genuine professional pride. Despite the primitive conditions and brutal techniques, there's something admirable about his dedication to relieving human suffering, even when his methods seem more likely to cause additional trauma. He represents humanity's persistent effort to heal itself, regardless of how limited the available tools might be. You step quietly into a birthing chamber where candlelight flickers against whitewashed walls, casting dancing shadows that seem to breathe with the rhythm of labor itself. The air is thick with the scent of lavender and rosemary, herbs chosen not just for their pleasant fragrance, but for their supposed power to ease pain and ensure safe delivery. Linen sheets rustle softly as experienced hands move with practiced efficiency, and you can hear the gentle murmur of women's voices speaking in an ancient language of comfort and encouragement that transcends all barriers of time and culture. The chamber belongs to good wife Margaret, a woman whose swollen belly speaks of life stirring within, while her face bears the serene expression of someone who has entrusted herself completely to forces beyond human control. Around her gather the wise women of the village, their weathered hands carrying decades of experience in coaxing reluctant babies into the world. Their leader is Dame Eleanor, a midwife whose reputation for bringing both mothers and children safely through the dangerous passage of birth has made her more valuable than any physician in the countryside. Medieval childbirth was essentially a roll of the dice played with the highest possible stakes, where maternal mortality rates would make modern doctors weep into their medical degrees. Yet within this dangerous landscape, women had created their own networks of care and knowledge, passing down techniques through generations of midwives who understood that birth was both a medical event and a sacred mystery requiring equal parts skill and prayer. Dame Eleanor examines Margaret with hands that seem to read the body's secrets through touch alone. She speaks in soothing tones about the position of the baby, the strength of the contractions, and the signs that suggest everything is progressing normally. Her confidence is infectious, filling the room with the sense that birth, however dangerous, is also the most natural thing in the world. She's like a medieval GPS system, except instead of calculating routes, she's navigating the treacherous journey from womb to world. The birthing chamber is prepared according to traditions that blend practical medicine with protective magic. Iron objects have been placed under the bed to ward off evil spirits, while birthing girdles inscribed with prayers encircle Margaret's waist like sacred armor against the dangers of delivery. Holy relics rest on the windowsill, their presence intended to invoke divine protection from mother and child. It's a fascinating mixture of faith and folklore, where medical care and spiritual warfare intersect in the most intimate of human experiences. Historians still debate whether medieval birthing practices were primarily helpful or harmful, but what's certain is that they provided crucial psychological support during one of life's most vulnerable moments. The ritual aspects of birth, the gathering of women, the lighting of special candles, the recitation of protective prayers, created a sense of community and shared strength that helped women endure pain that had no other relief available. As labor progresses, you observe the intricate dance of the midwives as they support Margaret through each contraction. They offer sips of herbal wine infused with pain-relieving herbs, massage her back with oils scented with calming botanicals, and speak constantly in voices that blend encouragement with ancient wisdom. Their movements are choreographed by centuries of tradition, each gesture carrying the accumulated knowledge of countless births, both successful and tragic. The birthing chair stands ready in the corner, its carved wooden frame worn smooth by generations of laboring women. This specialized furniture allows for an upright delivery position that actually makes more medical sense than the flat-on-back position that became standard in later centuries. Medieval midwives understood intuitively that gravity could be an ally in birth, though they probably would have described it as working with God's natural design rather than understanding physics. Dame Eleanor prepares her instruments with the same care a priest might show handling sacred vessels. Her birthing knife gleams in the candlelight, sharp enough to cut the umbilical cord cleanly, while soft linen cloths wait to receive the newborn. Everything has been blessed by the local priest, transforming ordinary medical tools into instruments of divine assistance. The line between medicine and miracle was refreshingly thin in medieval birthing chambers. As the moment of birth approaches, the atmosphere in the room becomes almost electric with anticipation and focused energy. The midwives position themselves with the precision of a surgical team, each woman knowing exactly what her role will be in the crucial moments ahead. Margaret's breathing deepens, and you can sense the ancient rhythm of labor reaching its crescendo, as if the entire universe has paused to witness this moment of creation. The baby arrives with a sudden intensity that makes birth seem like magic even to modern eyes accustomed to medical explanations. Dame Eleanor's hands move with practiced grace, supporting the emerging child while ensuring the umbilical cord doesn't become tangled. Her first priority is clearing the baby's airways, using techniques passed down through generations of women who understood that the first breath was often the difference between life and death. The newborn's cry fills the chamber like a triumphant announcement, and you watch as faces that have been tense with worry suddenly bloom into smiles of relief and joy. Dame Eleanor holds the baby aloft, examining fingers and toes with the thoroughness of someone who has learned to spot potential problems early. The infant is perfect, she announces, and the room fills with prayers of thanksgiving that feel as ancient as humanity itself. In this moment, surrounded by the warmth of successful birth, you're struck by how these medieval women had created something remarkable within the constraints of their dangerous world. Their combination of practical knowledge, emotional support, and spiritual comfort provided a framework for facing one of life's greatest challenges with dignity and hope, even when the odds were stacked against them. You push open the heavy wooden door that bears the distinctive red and white striped pole, the cheerful colors seeming oddly innocent for what awaits inside. The brass bell above the door chimes with a sound like distant church bells, and immediately your nostrils are filled with the competing sense of bay rum aftershave and something metallic that makes your stomach do uncomfortable little flips. Welcome to Master Thomas's establishment, where a man can get a shave, a haircut, and potentially lose a limb, all for the same reasonable price. The shop is divided into two distinct areas that tell the story of medieval multitasking at its most extreme. On one side, comfortable chairs face polished mirrors where gentlemen receive grooming services, their faces lathered with soap that smells of almonds and good intentions. On the other side, a surgical table waits ominously next to cabinets filled with saws, forceps, and other implements that would make a modern emergency room look positively quaint. It's like a spa that moonlights as a field hospital, which is exactly as relaxing as it sounds. Master Thomas himself is a robust man whose steady hands and keen eyes suggest he's equally comfortable trimming beards and amputating fingers. His leather apron bears the stains of both professions, creating an abstract pattern that tells stories you'd probably rather not hear. He greets you with a warm smile of someone who genuinely enjoys his work, though you can't help wondering which aspect of his dual career brings him more satisfaction. Hopefully it's the haircuts. The historical origins of barber surgery date back to medieval monasteries, where monks performed medical procedures until religious authorities decided that shedding blood was incompatible with holy orders. The job naturally fell to barbers, who already possessed sharp instruments and steady hands, even if their previous experience involved nothing more dangerous than trimming split ends. It was like promoting your hairdresser to chief of surgery based solely on their ability to use scissors without stabbing anyone. You settle into the barber's chair for what you hope will be merely a trim, though the sight of surgical instruments within arm's reach makes it difficult to relax completely. Master Thomas begins by examining your hair with the same methodical attention he might give to a suspicious wound, discussing techniques and approaches with the professional authority of someone who has spent years perfecting his craft. His touch is surprisingly gentle as he combs through your hair, his movements creating a soothing rhythm that makes you momentarily forget about the bone saw hanging on the nearby wall. The conversation turns to his medical practice as he works, And you learn that barber surgeons handled most of the routine medical procedures that were considered beneath the dignity of university-trained physicians. They set broken bones, treated wounds, performed tooth extractions, and conducted minor surgeries with varying degrees of success. Think of them as the general practitioners of the medieval world, except their waiting room came with the constant sound of scissors and the lingering scent of pomade. Historians still debate whether barber surgeons provided better practical care than formally educated physicians, but there's evidence that their hands-on experience often made them more effective healers. While university doctors debated theoretical principles in Latin, barber surgeons were actually touching patients, learning through direct observation what worked and what didn't. They developed techniques for controlling bleeding, preventing infection, and managing pain that were often more advanced than anything taught in medical schools. As Master Thomas continues your haircut, you notice the other customers waiting their turn, a mixture of men seeking grooming services and others who clearly have medical concerns. A merchant displays a bandaged hand that suggests recent surgical attention, while a farmer examines his reflection with the satisfaction of someone whose appearance has been dramatically improved. The democratic nature of the barbershop means that vanity and medical necessity share the same space, creating an oddly egalitarian atmosphere. The tools of the trade hang from wooden pegs like implements in a medieval torture chamber, except these are designed for healing rather than interrogation. Cupping glasses for bloodletting catch the light like crystal goblets, while trepanation drills rest beside combs in a juxtaposition that perfectly captures the dual nature of the profession. You realize that in a world where medical specialization was still centuries away, versatility was more valuable than expertise in any single area. Master Thomas explains his philosophy as he works, describing how the same principles that guide good grooming also apply to successful surgery. Attention to detail, steady hands, sharp instruments, and genuine concern for the customer's comfort. He speaks of the satisfaction that comes from transforming someone's appearance through skillful barbering, and the deeper fulfillment of actually saving lives through surgical intervention. It's a surprisingly thoughtful perspective on a profession that seems almost comically impractical by modern standards. The social dynamics of the barbershop fascinate you as much as its medical aspects. This is clearly a gathering place where men discuss politics, business, and personal concerns while receiving services that range from cosmetic to life-saving. The combination of routine grooming and emergency medicine creates a unique environment where trivial vanity and mortal danger coexist with remarkable casualness. It's like a modern coffee shop, except instead of discussing the weather while getting caffeine, people chat about crop prices while getting amputations. As your haircut nears completion, you're struck by how the barber surgeon represents one of medieval society's most practical responses to the shortage of medical care. By training craftsmen who already possessed relevant skills to handle basic medical procedures, communities created a healthcare system that was accessible, affordable, and surprisingly effective. These men weren't trying to revolutionize medicine. They were simply meeting the immediate needs of their neighbors with whatever skills and tools they possessed. Master Thomas finishes your trim with a flourish, using a straight razor to perfect the edges with the precision of a master craftsman. The blade moves across your skin with whisper-soft touches that demonstrate the kind of manual dexterity that made barber surgeons such valuable members of their communities. As he brushes away loose hair and applies a splash of fragrant aftershave, you realize that regardless of their medical qualifications, these men understood something important about human nature. Sometimes the best healing comes from simple human care and attention. You find yourself standing in the shadowy depths of a medieval physician's chamber, where the morning light filters through dust motes that dance like tiny spirits around an array of gleaming metal instruments. The air carries the sharp scent of steel and something that might be crushed herbs, though you're beginning to suspect that something is actually the lingering fear of previous patients. Before you on a wooden table lies a collection of drill bits that would make a modern construction worker weep with envy. except these aren't meant for hanging pictures or building shelves. The physician before you speaks with the calm authority of someone who has performed this procedure hundreds of times, though you can't decide if that's reassuring or absolutely terrifying. He explains that the persistent headaches plaguing you are clearly the result of evil humors trapped within your skull, creating pressure that can only be relieved through the ancient art of trepanation. Essentially, he wants to drill a hole in your head to let the bad spirits escape, which sounds like the kind of medical advice you'd expect from someone who also believes in unicorns. The tools laid out before you tell the story of human ingenuity applied to skull perforation with disturbing creativity. There are hand-cranked drills that look like medieval torture devices, circular cutting instruments called trepines that remove neat plugs of bone, and elevators designed to lift away bone fragments with the delicacy of a jeweler handling precious stones. Each tool is polished to mirror brightness and sharp enough to cut through bone like butter, assuming butter was as hard as limestone and screamed when you cut it. Medieval trepanation wasn't actually the product of complete medical ignorance, though it certainly sounds that way to modern ears. Archaeological evidence suggests that the procedure was performed across many ancient cultures, with survival rates that were surprisingly high given the primitive conditions. Some patients not only survived the drilling, but lived for years afterward, their skulls showing clear signs of healing around the surgical sites. Of course, we have no way of knowing whether their headaches actually improved, since medieval patient satisfaction surveys were notoriously unreliable. The physician begins his examination by feeling your skull with fingers that seem to read bone density through touch alone. He speaks of the signs that indicate trapped spirits, the way your eyes appear slightly unfocused, the tension in your jaw, the particular quality of your complaints about head pain. His diagnostic method involves equal parts medical observation and spiritual divination, creating a framework for treatment that covers all possible supernatural bases while accidentally addressing some legitimate medical concerns. Historians still debate whether trepanation was primarily medical treatment or religious ritual, but the truth probably depends on who was holding the drill. Some practitioners developed genuine surgical skill, learning to avoid major blood vessels and minimize brain damage while creating openings that could relieve actual medical conditions like subdural hematomas. Others were essentially shamans with power tools, relying more on supernatural intervention than anatomical knowledge to achieve positive outcomes. The preparation ritual involves positioning you on a wooden chair that has been specially designed to hold patients steady during skull drilling. The physician's assistants gather around with the practiced efficiency of a medical team, even though their medical training consists primarily of previous experience holding down screaming patients. One assistant places a leather bit between your teeth, explaining that it will prevent you from biting your tongue, though you suspect it's really meant to muffle the sounds that might discourage future customers. You watch with fascination and growing anxiety as the physician selects his instruments, explaining each one's particular advantages for different types of skull work. The hand drill creates precise, small holes perfect for releasing specific pressures, while the trepine removes larger sections suitable for more extensive spirit evacuation. He speaks with the enthusiasm of a craftsman discussing his favorite tools, which would be charming if those tools weren't specifically designed for boring holes in human heads. The actual procedure begins with the physician making careful measurements on your skull, marking the optimal drilling site with a piece of charcoal. His movements are surprisingly gentle as he positions the drill bit against bone, explaining that the key to successful trepanation is steady pressure applied at the correct angle. The sound of metal grinding against bone creates a vibration that seems to resonate through your entire skeleton, while the scent of bone dust mingles with the aromatic herbs burning in the corner. What's remarkable about medieval trepanation isn't its primitive brutality, but its sophisticated understanding of the psychological aspects of healing. The elaborate ritual, the impressive instruments, the physician's confident explanations. All of these elements combined to create a powerful placebo effect that sometimes actually did relieve patients' symptoms. Even when the physical intervention was useless or harmful, the ceremony of treatment provided hope and meaning that could be therapeutically valuable in their own right. As the drill bit penetrates deeper in a bone, you focus on the physician's steady hands and calm voice, finding unexpected comfort in his professional competence. Despite the medieval setting and questionable medical theory, there's something reassuring about being in the care of someone who clearly takes his work seriously and genuinely wants to help. Even if his help involves power tools applied to your cranium, at least he's approaching the task with dedication and skill. The procedure concludes with the physician carefully cleaning the newly created opening and applying a mixture of herbs and honey that actually does have some antimicrobial properties. He explains that the hole will allow trapped spirits to escape while preventing new ones from entering, creating a permanent solution to your supernatural head pressure problems. As you sit quietly, feeling oddly peaceful despite having acquired a new ventilation system in your skull, you realize that sometimes the strangest treatments work simply because someone cared enough to try. You wake to the sound of church bells clanging in frantic, uneven rhythms that seem to pierce through your very soul, their bronze voices crying out across a city that has suddenly become a place of whispered prayers and barricaded doors. The morning air carries an unusual stillness, broken only by the distant sound of running footsteps on cobblestone and the soft thud of shutters being hastily closed. Something is terribly wrong in this Tudor world, and you can feel it in the way the very atmosphere seems to thicken with collective fear and desperate hope. The sweating sickness has arrived. This mysterious epidemic appeared in England like a supernatural curse, striking with a speed that made the Black Death look leisurely by comparison. Victims could wake feeling perfectly healthy and be dead before sunset, their bodies consumed by fever so intense it seemed to burn from within. The disease earned its name from the profuse sweating that marked its onset, as if the body were trying to expel some malevolent force through every pore. Medieval physicians called it sudor anglicus, though they might as well have called it, "We have absolutely no idea what this is or how to stop it." You venture cautiously into the streets, where the usual morning bustle has been replaced by an eerie quiet punctuated by the occasional sound of weeping from behind closed doors. Those few people you encounter move with the hurried gait of individuals who believe that speed might somehow outrun invisible death. Their faces are pale with fear, and many hold herbs or amulets pressed to their noses, as if pleasant scents could ward off whatever evil force was stalking through the city like some invisible predator. The symptoms begin subtly, almost innocently, with a slight headache that could easily be mistaken for too much ale the night before. Then comes the fever, rising so quickly that victims often describe feeling as if they've been thrust into a furnace. Violent sweating follows, soaking through clothing and bedding as the body fights against an enemy it cannot identify. The final stage brings delirium, where patients speak to people who aren't there and see visions that range from terrifying to oddly comforting. A physician hurries past, his face grim with the expression of someone who has watched too many patients die despite his best efforts. The medical community was completely baffled by sweating sickness, unable to apply their usual theories about humoral imbalances or bad air to a disease that struck so quickly and unpredictably. Some blamed the alignment of planets, others suspected poison wells, and a few whispered about divine punishment for national sins. The truth was that nobody had the slightest idea what they were dealing with, which must have been almost as terrifying as the disease itself. Historians still debate what sweating sickness actually was, with theories ranging from influenza to hantavirus to some completely extinct pathogen that vanished as mysteriously as it appeared. What we know for certain is that it terrorized England through 5 major outbreaks between 1485 and 1551, then disappeared entirely, leaving behind only historical accounts that read like descriptions of supernatural horror. The disease seemed to prefer the wealthy and well-fed, sparing peasants while decimating the ranks of nobility and merchants. You seek shelter in a tavern that remains open despite the crisis, where the atmosphere feels like a ship's cabin during a storm. People huddled together against forces beyond their control. The keeper explains that business has actually improved, as people seek comfort in ale and companionship when death stalks the streets so openly. There's gallows humor in his voice as he describes how the threat of immediate death makes everyone suddenly very interested in living fully in the present moment. Nothing like mortality to put things in perspective. The most terrifying aspect of sweating sickness wasn't just its lethality, but its randomness. Unlike plague, which followed predictable patterns of transmission, this disease seemed to strike according to no logic that medieval minds could comprehend. Entire households might be spared while their neighbors perished, healthy young adults died, while elderly relatives survived, and the disease could vanish from a town as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind traumatized survivors who spent years waiting for its return. Treatment options were essentially limited to prayer and hope, though physicians tried everything in their considerable arsenal of useless remedies. Some prescribed immediate bloodletting to reduce the dangerous heat, while others recommended warming treatments to encourage sweating. Patients were wrapped in heavy blankets and given hot wine, or conversely stripped naked and cooled with wet cloths. The medical response was like throwing every possible solution at a problem that defied all contemporary understanding of how diseases worked. You observe how the epidemic has transformed social interactions, creating a curious mixture of isolation and intimacy. People avoid physical contact, yet seek emotional connection more desperately than ever. Conversations focus on immediate concerns rather than future plans, as if making long-term arrangements might somehow tempt fate. There's something almost philosophical about how sudden mortality clarifies what really matters, stripping away social pretensions to reveal the basic human need for comfort and companionship. The psychological impact of sweating sickness extended far beyond its immediate victims, creating a collective trauma that shaped an entire generation's relationship with mortality. Survivors developed a heightened awareness of life's fragility that influenced everything from art to politics to personal relationships. The knowledge that death could arrive without warning, striking the healthy as easily as the sick, fundamentally altered how people understood their place in the world and their relationship with divine providence. As evening approaches, you notice how the city settles into an uneasy quiet broken only by the sound of church bells marking another funeral and the soft murmur of prayers drifting from every dwelling. The sweating sickness has transformed this bustling medieval community into something resembling a monastery, where every moment feels precious and every breath carries the weight of grateful survival. In facing this mysterious enemy, people have discovered both their profound vulnerability and their remarkable capacity for grace under pressure. You step across the threshold of a chamber where science and sorcery dance together in an eternal waltz, their boundaries blurred like watercolors bleeding into one another. The room pulses with the warm glow of furnaces that burn day and night, their flames licking at glass vessels filled with liquids that shimmer like captured starlight. The air itself seems alive with possibility, thick with vapors that carry scents both familiar and otherworldly. Sulfur and roses, mercury and cinnamon, the metallic tang of transformation and the sweet perfume of dreams made manifest. Master Cornelius tends his apparatus with the devotion of a priest attending to sacred relics. His movements graceful and precise as he manipulates instruments that seem to exist in the liminal space between laboratory equipment and magical artifacts. His alchemical workshop represents the cutting edge of 16th century science, though that edge is considerably sharper on the mysticism side than on what we'd recognize as actual chemistry. He's essentially running a medieval startup company dedicated to turning base metals into gold. Except his business model involves significantly more incantations and substantially less venture capital. The great work of alchemy stretches before you in a symphony of bubbling retorts, distillation columns that spiral toward heaven like glass prayers, and furnaces whose fires never die. Each piece of equipment serves multiple purposes in the grand quest to understand the fundamental nature of matter itself. That crucible heating over glowing coals might be purifying mercury, creating a universal solvent, or attempting to brew the elixir of eternal life. Possibly all three simultaneously, because medieval multitasking was apparently quite ambitious. You watch as Master Cornelius demonstrates the process of creating the Philosopher's Stone, that legendary substance capable of transmuting lead into gold and granting immortality to whoever possesses it. His hands move with practiced certainty as he combines elements according to formulas that read like poetry written in chemical notation. The process involves repeated cycles of dissolution and coagulation, each stage bringing the base matter closer to perfection through what alchemists called the marriage of opposites. Medieval alchemy represented humanity's first serious attempt to understand chemical processes, even though their theoretical framework involved more angels than atoms. Alchemists developed many of the basic techniques still used in modern chemistry: distillation, sublimation, crystallization, and extraction, while pursuing goals that range from practical medicine to outright magic. They were like medieval venture capitalists investing in research and development, except their desired return on investment included eternal youth and unlimited wealth. The workshop contains an impressive library where leather-bound volumes hold the accumulated wisdom of centuries of experimental mysticism. These texts blend practical chemical knowledge with hermetic philosophy, astrological correspondences, and spiritual allegory, creating a literature that reads like science fiction written by medieval monks. Master Cornelius explains that understanding alchemy requires equal facility with laboratory technique and mystical interpretation, as if chemistry were a form of applied theology. Historians still debate whether alchemists were proto-scientists or elaborate con artists, but the truth encompasses both possibilities and several others that defy easy categorization. Some genuinely advanced human understanding of chemical processes while pursuing impossible goals, discovering new compounds and refining techniques that would prove valuable centuries later. Others were essentially running elaborate confidence schemes, using impressive equipment and mysterious jargon to separate wealthy patrons from their money while producing nothing more valuable than expensive smoke and mirrors. You observe the daily rhythm of alchemical work, where each experiment unfolds according to precise timing based on astrological calculations and lunar phases. The position of planets supposedly influences chemical reactions, while the seasons determine which operations are most likely to succeed. It's like having a chemistry lab run by astrologers, which explains why so many experiments failed, but also why the successful ones seemed almost miraculous to contemporary observers. The social dynamics of alchemy fascinate you as much as its chemical aspects. Practitioners formed secretive communities that shared knowledge through coded language and symbolic imagery, protecting their discoveries while building networks of mutual support and intellectual exchange. These alchemical brotherhoods represented some of medieval Europe's most sophisticated research institutions, combining practical experimentation with theoretical speculation in ways that wouldn't be seen again until the rise of modern universities. Master Cornelius shows you samples of his work: metals that gleam with unusual luster, crystals that seem to capture and hold light, and liquids that change color when exposed to air. While none of these represent actual transmutation of elements, they demonstrate genuine chemical knowledge applied to creating effects that appeared magical to medieval observers. The boundary between chemistry and stage magic was delightfully thin in alchemical laboratories, where scientific method and theatrical presentation work hand in hand. As your visit concludes, you're struck by how alchemy represents humanity's eternal desire to understand and control the natural world, even when armed with theories that were completely wrong. These medieval chemists may not have succeeded in creating gold from lead, but they developed experimental techniques, laboratory equipment, and ways of thinking about matter that laid crucial groundwork for modern science. They were like intellectual archaeologists, digging through layers of mysticism to uncover genuine chemical truths. The evening light filtering through the workshop windows transforms the glass apparatus into a constellation of amber and crystal, each vessel catching and reflecting illumination like stars in an earthbound galaxy. In this magical hour between day and night, when shadows lengthen and reality becomes more flexible, you can almost believe that transmutation might be possible after all. Not the literal conversion of metals, but the deeper alchemy of human understanding gradually transforming ignorance into wisdom, one carefully documented experiment at a time. You find yourself wandering through a monastery garden at dawn, where dewdrops cling to leaves like tiny crystal oracles, and the morning air carries whispers of divine secrets written in green ink across the landscape. The gentle rustle of your robes against stone pathways creates a meditative rhythm as you follow Brother Matthias, whose weathered hands gesture toward plants that seem ordinary until you learn to read the sacred text, supposedly inscribed in their very forms by the hand of God himself. "Observe the walnut," he says, his voice soft as morning mist, pointing to a tree whose branches cast intricate shadows across the herb beds. "See how the nut resembles a human brain, with its two halves and wrinkled surface?" His fingers trace the shell's contours with the reverence of someone reading scripture. This is the doctrine of signatures, a medical theory that suggests the Almighty was thoughtful enough to provide visual instructions for using every healing plant, like divine product labeling for those wise enough to decode the messages. Medieval physicians believed that God had marked each plant with clear signs indicating its medicinal purpose, creating a natural pharmacy where the cure for every ailment was hiding in plain sight. Yellow flowers obviously treated jaundice, red plants cured blood disorders, and anything shaped like a human organ was destined to heal that particular body part. It was like having a cosmic instruction manual written in botanical hieroglyphs, assuming you trusted that the universe had a sense of humor about medical education. Brother Matthias leads you to a patch of bloodroot, its white flowers emerging from soil still dark with morning moisture. He explains how the plant's red sap clearly indicates its purpose in treating blood disorders, the crimson liquid flowing like liquid rubies when the stem is broken. The sight is genuinely striking, nature producing its own red ink, as if advertising its medicinal properties to anyone observant enough to notice the connection. You pause beside a stand of lungwort, whose spotted leaves supposedly bear the signature of diseased lungs, their mottled pattern resembling the appearance of respiratory illness. The plant's name reflects this belief, and medieval herbalists prescribed it regularly for coughs, consumption, and other breathing problems. Remarkably, modern research has discovered that lungwort does contain compounds with mild expectorant properties, suggesting that sometimes even the most mystical medical theories accidentally stumbled onto genuine therapeutic relationships. The monastery garden represents one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated approaches to pharmaceutical research, combining careful observation of plant properties with theological interpretation of natural patterns. Monks spent decades documenting which plants resembled which body parts, creating elaborate catalogs that mapped the supposed connections between botanical signatures and human anatomy. It was like playing a cosmic game of matching, where getting the right answer could literally be a matter of life and death. Historians still debate whether the doctrine of signatures represented genuine medical insight or elaborate wishful thinking dressed up as divine revelation. Some argue that the theory encouraged detailed observation of plant characteristics, leading to discoveries that might otherwise have been missed. Others suggest it was primarily a way to justify traditional remedies by giving them theological authority, making folk medicine more acceptable to religious authorities who preferred their healing to come with proper biblical endorsement. You examine a cluster of hepatica, whose three-lobed leaves supposedly mirror the shape of the human liver. Brother Matthias explains how physicians prescribe this plant for liver ailments, the visual similarity providing clear evidence of God's intended purpose. The leaves feel soft between your fingers, their surface slightly fuzzy like velvet that has been kissed by morning dew. Whether or not hepatica actually benefits liver function, there's something deeply satisfying about the connection between form and supposed function. The garden path winds past eyebright, a delicate flower whose appearance supposedly resembles the human eye, complete with what medieval observers interpreted as iris and pupil markings. The plant was regularly used to treat eye problems, from simple irritation to more serious vision disorders. You lean closer to examine the flowers, trying to see the ocular resemblance that convinced generations of healers, though you suspect it requires a considerable leap of botanical imagination to make the connection. As the morning progresses, you discover that signature theory extended beyond simple visual resemblance to include behavioral and environmental clues. Plants that grew in wet conditions were thought to treat diseases caused by excess moisture, while those that thrived in dry soil supposedly cured conditions related to heat and dryness. It was like ecological astrology, where a plant's growing preferences revealed its cosmic purpose in the grand scheme of divine medical planning. Brother Matthias shows you ginseng root, whose humanoid shape has made it one of the most prized signature plants across multiple cultures. The root's resemblance to a human figure, complete with what appear to be arms and legs, convinced healers that it could strengthen the entire body and promote longevity. The price of high-quality ginseng reflected this belief, with perfectly human-shaped roots commanding fortunes from wealthy patients seeking the ultimate whole-body tonic. You pause to consider how the doctrine of signatures provided medieval people with a sense of living in a universe designed specifically for their benefit, where every plant existed as part of a divine medical system created for human healing. This worldview transformed the natural world into a vast pharmacy where cures waited to be discovered by those trained to read God's botanical handwriting. Even if the theory was scientifically questionable, it encouraged detailed study of plant properties and systematic thinking about the relationships between form and function. The morning light grows stronger, illuminating the garden like a natural cathedral where theology and botany merge in peaceful harmony. As you walk among plants marked with their supposed divine signatures, you're struck by how this ancient theory represents humanity's persistent desire to find meaning and purpose in the natural world, to believe that the universe provides exactly what we need if we're wise enough to interpret the signs correctly. You stand at the entrance to a medieval city that has become a prison without walls, where the ordinary rhythm of daily life has been replaced by an eerie stillness that seems to press against your skin like invisible weight. The massive wooden gates are sealed with iron bolts and marked with red crosses that gleam like fresh blood in the morning light, their stark simplicity conveying a message that transcends language barriers. Death has taken up residence here, and no one enters or leaves until it decides to move on to the next destination. The guards who patrol the city's perimeter wear leather masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, their eyes visible through crude glass lenses that make them look like exotic insects studying specimens under magnification. They carry long poles for maintaining distance from anyone who approaches, as if human contact itself has become a form of contamination that could spread through the slightest touch. It's like medieval social distancing, except instead of flattening curves, they're trying to prevent the complete extinction of their community. This is quarantine in its original form, from the Italian quaranta giorni, 40 days of enforced isolation that represented humanity's first systematic attempt to control epidemic disease through administrative policy rather than prayer alone. The concept emerged from the practical observation that plagues seemed to spread through human contact, leading authorities to conclude that separation might succeed where medical treatment had failed. It was like putting an entire city in timeout until the invisible monster got bored and wandered away. You observe the daily routines that have evolved within this sealed community, where ordinary social interactions have been transformed into elaborate rituals of survival. Merchants conduct business by leaving goods at designated distances, payment placed in vinegar-filled bowls that supposedly neutralize contamination. Families communicate with relatives through windows, their voices carrying across empty streets like songs echoing in abandoned cathedrals. Even love letters must be fumigated before delivery, romance filtered through smoke and herbs. The psychological impact of quarantine extends far beyond its immediate medical effects, creating a collective experience of suspended animation where time moves differently and normal social hierarchies become meaningless. Wealthy merchants find themselves subject to the same restrictions as common laborers, while physicians who once commanded great respect discover their authority limited by their inability to cure the disease that has imprisoned everyone equally. Plague was remarkably democratic in its disregard for social status. Food arrives at the city gates like offerings to appease angry gods, left by farmers who approach only close enough to unload their carts before retreating to safe distances. The distribution system within the city has evolved into a complex network of designated collectors and delivery routes designed to minimize contact while ensuring everyone receives basic sustenance. It's like medieval meal delivery, except the drivers are more worried about catching death than getting bad reviews. Historians still debate whether medieval quarantine measures were genuinely effective at controlling plague transmission or simply provided the illusion of meaningful action during periods of helpless terror. What's certain is that quarantine represented a revolutionary shift from passive acceptance of epidemic disease to active attempts at prevention through collective social action. Communities were essentially conducting large-scale medical experiments on themselves, with survival as the only meaningful measure of success. You notice how quarantine has altered the city's soundscape, replacing the usual cacophony of commerce and conversation with subtler rhythms of isolated existence. Church bells still mark the hours, but their bronze voices now carry different meanings. Calls to prayer for the sick, announcements of death, and occasional celebrations of recovery that ring across empty squares like messages of hope transmitted through metal and air. Even silence has become a form of communication, pregnant with meaning and weighted with shared understanding. The economic implications of quarantine create their own form of social experiment, as communities discover which activities are truly essential and which were merely habitual. Bakers continue working because people need bread, while jewelers find their services suddenly irrelevant in a world where survival trumps decoration. The hierarchy of needs becomes starkly visible when normal social structures are stripped away by the requirement for physical isolation. Within the sealed city, you observe how people have adapted their living spaces to accommodate indefinite confinement. Gardens appear on rooftops and in courtyards as residents attempt to achieve some measure of self-sufficiency. Windows become stages for entertainment as musicians perform for audiences they cannot touch. Even romance adapts, with courtship conducted through songs, letters, and elaborate gestures performed at safe distances. Love finds a way, even when that way involves significantly more creativity than usual. The children born during quarantine will grow up with fundamentally different understandings of normal social interaction. Their early experiences shaped by the knowledge that other people can be sources of deadly danger, as well as comfort and companionship. These quarantine babies represent a generation whose relationship with community and isolation has been forever altered by their earliest experiences of human society under extraordinary pressure. As weeks turn into months, you witness how quarantine communities develop their own cultural innovations born from necessity and shared hardship. New forms of art emerge that can be appreciated from distance, games that require no physical contact, and ceremonies that maintain social bonds while respecting medical requirements. Humanity's remarkable adaptability expresses itself through creative solutions to problems that no previous generation had been forced to solve. The eventual lifting of quarantine, when it comes, represents not just the end of medical isolation, but a form of collective rebirth for communities that have been transformed by their shared experience of enforced separation. People emerge changed by months of living differently, carrying with them new understanding of what constitutes essential human connection and what aspects of normal social life they had taken for granted until forced to live without them. You enter the hallowed halls of a medieval university where the morning light filters through tall windows like liquid amber, illuminating dust motes that dance above wooden benches worn smooth by generations of aspiring physicians. The air carries the distinctive scent of vellum and ink, mixed with something indefinably scholarly that makes you think of serious thoughts and serious people thinking them very seriously indeed. Here, in chambers that echo with centuries of accumulated wisdom, you're about to discover how medieval doctors learned their trade without ever actually touching a patient until graduation day. The lecture hall buzzes with the soft murmur of Latin conversation as students in dark robes gather around their master, a distinguished physician whose silver beard and penetrating gaze suggest he's memorized every medical text written since Hippocrates first suggested that maybe diseases had natural causes rather than supernatural ones. His voice carries the authority of someone who has spent decades studying the theoretical foundations of medicine while maintaining a healthy distance from anything as messy as actual sick people. It's like learning to be a chef by reading cookbooks, but never being allowed near a kitchen. Medieval medical education was essentially a 6-year course in ancient Greek philosophy with a minor in Latin translation, where students memorized the works of classical authorities without questioning their accuracy or relevance to contemporary practice. The curriculum was based on texts that were centuries or even millennia old, their wisdom preserved through endless copying and recopying that sometimes introduced creative interpretations of the original ideas. Imagine playing telephone across 1,000 years, except the message involves life and death medical decisions. You observe as the professor demonstrates the proper method for examining patients without actually examining anyone, using elaborate diagrams and theoretical models to explain diagnostic techniques that his students will eventually attempt on real human beings. The disconnect between classroom theory and clinical reality was so vast that newly graduated physicians often killed more patients through inexperience than they saved through knowledge. Medical school was like driver's education taught entirely through textbooks, with the first actual driving lesson scheduled for after you'd already received your license. The professor explains the social hierarchy that governs medical practice, where university-trained physicians occupy the highest rank among healers due to their mastery of classical texts and their ability to conduct consultations entirely in Latin. These learned doctors rarely touched patients directly, preferring to diagnose through scholarly discussion and theoretical analysis, while leaving the actual hands-on work to surgeons and barber surgeons who lacked formal education but possessed practical experience. It was like having a medical system run by people who understood everything about disease except how to cure it. Historians still debate whether medieval medical education produced competent healers or elaborate fraudsters armed with impressive degrees and dangerous self-confidence. What's certain is that the system created a class of physicians who commanded enormous respect and substantial fees despite having limited practical knowledge about treating actual illnesses. Their authority derived from their mastery of ancient texts rather than their ability to help patients, making them essentially very expensive medical librarians. You examine the curriculum in detail, discovering that aspiring physicians spent years studying subjects like astrology, philosophy, and rhetoric while devoting relatively little time to anatomy, pharmacology, or clinical observation. The educational philosophy assumed that understanding the theoretical principles underlying health and disease was more important than developing practical skills for treating sick people. It was like training airplane pilots by teaching them the history of flight while never actually letting them see an aircraft. The university's library contains medical texts that represent the accumulated wisdom of classical antiquity. Their pages filled with theories that range from brilliant insights to complete nonsense, often within the same paragraph. Students memorize these works with religious devotion, treating ancient authorities like infallible oracles whose wisdom could not be questioned or improved upon. The idea that contemporary observation might contradict classical teaching was essentially heretical, making medical progress nearly impossible within the formal educational system. Practical training, when it occurred at all, consisted mainly of observing senior physicians during their consultations, where students learned to mimic the authoritative manner and impressive vocabulary that marked a successful medical practice. The actual diagnosis and treatment remained largely theoretical exercises, with success measured by the physician's ability to explain symptoms according to classical theory rather than their effectiveness at actually curing diseases. Patient outcomes were less important than theoretical consistency. You notice how the medieval medical education system reflected broader cultural values that prioritized authority over innovation, tradition over experimentation, and theoretical knowledge over practical skill. Universities existed primarily to preserve and transmit classical learning rather than to generate new knowledge, making them essentially intellectual museums dedicated to ancient wisdom. The idea that students might discover something their teachers didn't know was viewed as dangerous pride rather than scientific progress. The graduation ceremony represents the culmination of years spent mastering texts without touching patients, as new physicians receive their degrees and the legal authority to practice medicine based entirely on their theoretical knowledge. These fresh graduates emerge from university with impressive Latin vocabularies and detailed understanding of ancient medical philosophy, but virtually no practical experience treating actual illnesses. They're like theoretical warriors who have studied every military text ever written but have never held a sword. As you observe these future physicians preparing to inflict their education on unsuspecting patients, you're struck by how the medieval medical establishment had created a system that perfectly preserved ancient ignorance while actively discouraging the kind of practical observation that might have led to genuine medical advancement. It was an educational approach that guaranteed the perpetual repetition of classical mistakes while preventing the accumulation of new knowledge that could have improved patient care. You find yourself seated by a cottage hearth where the gentle crackle of burning oak mingles with the soft whisper of wind through thatched eaves, creating a symphony of domestic comfort that has remained unchanged for countless generations. The air is rich with the scent of drying herbs hanging from wooden beams like aromatic prayers, their earthy fragrances telling stories of ancient wisdom passed down through bloodlines that stretch back to the very beginnings of human memory. Here, in the warm glow of firelight, you're about to discover that sometimes the most effective medicine comes not from university halls or apothecary shops, but from the weathered hands of grandmothers who learned their healing arts at kitchen tables and garden gates. Old Grandmother Willow settles into her chair with the careful grace of someone whose bones carry decades of accumulated wisdom along with their accumulated aches. Her hands, stained permanently green from a lifetime of working with plants, move with the automatic precision of muscle memory as she sorts through bundles of herbs that seem to organize themselves under her touch. She speaks in the rolling cadence of someone who has told these stories 1,000 times, each retelling polishing the words until they gleam like river stones worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. The physicians with their fancy Latin and expensive remedies. She chuckles, her voice warm as honeyed wine. They come and go like summer storms, making much noise and charging high prices for cures that work about, as well as praying to a wooden spoon. Her weathered fingers select a sprig of willow bark with the confidence of someone who has never needed to read a medical textbook to understand that this particular tree holds the secret to easing pain. Modern science would eventually extract salicin from willow bark to create aspirin, but Grandmother Willow's ancestors were chewing it for headaches when Hippocrates was still learning to walk. The cottage kitchen serves as her dispensary, where shelves lined with ceramic pots hold remedies that have been tested not in university laboratories, but in the crucible of daily necessity. Each container bears labels written in a script that belongs more to folk magic than formal medicine, yet the contents represent generations of careful observation and practical experimentation. Nettle for the blood, she explains, her fingers dancing across jars like a pianist playing familiar melodies. Elderflower for fever, chamomile for restless children and anxious mothers. Folk medicine operated on principles that university-trained physicians often dismissed as superstition. Yet these traditional remedies frequently proved more effective than expensive treatments prescribed by learned doctors. Grandmother Willow's knowledge came from centuries of women who observed, experimented, and passed down their discoveries through informal networks that connected every cottage and farmhouse like an invisible web of healing wisdom. They were conducting clinical trials before anyone had invented the term, using their own families and communities as test subjects in experiments guided by necessity rather than theory. Historians still debate whether folk remedies were genuine medicine or elaborate placebos dressed up in traditional authority. But modern pharmacology has validated many traditional treatments that were once dismissed as peasant superstition. Digitalis from foxglove for heart conditions, quinine from cinchona bark for malaria, and dozens of other compounds that form the foundation of contemporary medicine were all discovered by people like Grandmother Willow, who understood plants not through chemical formulas, but through patient observation of their effects. You watch as she prepares a remedy for a neighbor's persistent cough, her movements following patterns so ingrained they seem almost choreographed. First comes the measuring, done not with precise instruments, but with handfuls and pinches that somehow produce consistent results. Then the mixing, where different herbs blend together in combinations that reflect not just medical knowledge, but cultural traditions that connect healing with cooking, gardening, and the seasonal rhythms of rural life. It's like watching someone perform a ritual that's simultaneously practical and sacred. The preparation methods themselves represent sophisticated understanding of how to extract and preserve the active compounds in healing plants. Grandmother Willow knows exactly how long to steep particular herbs, which ones require boiling versus gentle warming, and how to combine ingredients so their effects complement rather than cancel each other. Her techniques have been refined through countless iterations, each generation adding improvements while preserving the essential knowledge that made the remedies effective in the first place. Folk healers like Grandmother Willow occupied a unique position in medieval society, serving communities that couldn't afford university-trained physicians, while often providing more effective treatment than formal medicine offered. Their practices blended practical knowledge with spiritual comfort, treating not just physical symptoms, but the emotional and social dimensions of illness that academic medicine frequently ignored. They understood that healing involved the whole person, not just the diseased body part. You notice how her diagnostic methods rely on careful observation of the whole person rather than abstract theoretical models. She examines not just symptoms, but complexion, posture, voice quality, and dozens of subtle signs that reveal information about her patient's overall health and constitution. Her questions probe living conditions, emotional state, and social circumstances, recognizing that effective treatment must address the root causes of illness rather than just their surface manifestations. The social network surrounding folk medicine created systems of mutual support that extended far beyond individual treatment. Grandmother Willow's Kitchen serves as an informal clinic where neighbors gather to share remedies, discuss symptoms, and provide emotional support during illness. These gatherings represent primitive but effective forms of public health education, where medical knowledge spreads through community conversation rather than formal instruction. As evening deepens, you realize that folk medicine represented something that formal medical education often missed: the understanding that healing is fundamentally a human activity requiring empathy, patience, and genuine care for suffering people. Grandmother Willow's remedies work not just because of their chemical properties, but because they're administered by someone who knows her patients as complete human beings rather than collections of symptoms requiring theoretical solutions. The wisdom preserved in cottages like this one represents humanity's longest-running medical experiment, conducted across countless generations of ordinary people who observed what worked, remembered what helped, and passed down their discoveries through the intimate networks of family and community that connected human experience across centuries of shared struggle and shared hope. You stand at the threshold of a new era, where the first pale rays of enlightenment begin to pierce through centuries of medical darkness like sunrise breaking over a landscape that has been sleeping too long. The air itself seems different here, charged with the electricity of minds beginning to question, to observe, to wonder if perhaps the ancient authorities might have been wrong about a few things. In workshops and universities across Europe, a quiet revolution is stirring, one that will transform medicine from mystical art into something resembling actual science, though the journey will take several more centuries and involve considerably more arguing than anyone currently expects. You find yourself in the study of Andreas Vesalius, a young physician whose hands tremble slightly as he prepares to do something that could get him excommunicated, imprisoned, or worse. Before him lies a human cadaver, its pale form representing both the ultimate medical textbook and the most dangerous form of research material available in 16th century Europe. The Church had forbidden human dissection for centuries, but Vesalius has decided that understanding the human body might require actually looking inside one, which is either brilliant medical reasoning or the kind of curiosity that tends to end badly for curious people. The scent of preservation herbs mingles with something earthier as Vesalius makes his first incision, his blade moving with the reverence of someone who understands he's crossing a line that has existed since ancient times. Around him, students lean forward with expressions that blend fascination and terror, watching as their professor peels back layers of skin to reveal the actual architecture of human anatomy rather than the theoretical models they've memorized from classical texts. It's like finally looking under the hood of a car after years of trying to fix engines through philosophical discussion. What Vesalius discovers revolutionizes everything medieval medicine thought it knew about the human body. The classical texts he studied for years contain hundreds of errors, describing organs that don't exist and missing structures that are clearly visible to anyone willing to look. Galen, the ancient authority whose works formed the foundation of medical education, had apparently based his anatomical descriptions on animal dissections rather than human observation, leading to centuries of physicians treating patients based on pig anatomy. The irony was as thick as the preservation fluid. Historians still debate whether Vesalius was a revolutionary genius or simply the first person brave enough to state the obvious, but his willingness to trust observation over authority marked the beginning of modern medical science. His anatomical drawings, created with artistic precision and scientific accuracy, would replace centuries of theoretical speculation with detailed maps of actual human structure. For the first time since ancient Greece, physicians would base their treatments on real knowledge rather than inherited assumptions. You observe as other pioneers of medical revolution work quietly in their laboratories and consulting rooms. William Harvey studies the circulation of blood, discovering that it flows in a complete circuit rather than being consumed by the body like fuel in a furnace. His experiments with simple tools and careful observation overthrow another fundamental assumption of classical medicine, proving that the heart functions as a pump rather than the source of heat that ancient physicians believed it to be. The development of the printing press accelerates the spread of new medical knowledge, allowing revolutionary discoveries to reach physicians across Europe within months rather than decades. Medical texts no longer depend on hand copying by scribes who might introduce their own creative interpretations, creating a more reliable system for preserving and transmitting anatomical and therapeutic knowledge. Information wants to be free, as it turns out, and the printing press was medieval medicine's first step toward making that freedom possible. As you witness these early stirrings of scientific method, you're struck by how the transition from medieval to modern medicine required not just new discoveries, but a fundamental shift in how physicians thought about knowledge itself. The willingness to question authority, to trust observation over tradition, and to admit that ancient texts might contain errors represents a psychological revolution as significant as any technical advancement. The tools of medicine begin to change as well, with the development of more precise instruments for observation and measurement. Simple magnifying glasses reveal details of anatomy invisible to the naked eye, while improved surgical instruments allow for more delicate procedures. The marriage of craftsmanship and scientific curiosity produces innovations that make medical practice both more effective and more humane. You watch as the seeds of modern medical education take root, with some universities beginning to emphasize practical observation alongside theoretical study. Students learn anatomy by dissecting actual bodies rather than memorizing classical texts, while clinical observation becomes as important as philosophical discussion. The transformation is gradual, often meeting resistance from traditional authorities who prefer the certainty of ancient wisdom to the uncertainty of new discovery. The emergence of scientific method in medicine creates new forms of collaboration between physicians, as researchers begin sharing observations and comparing results across different institutions and countries. The secretive traditions of medieval healing give way to more open exchange of knowledge, creating networks of investigation that span continents and accelerate the pace of discovery. As our journey through 16th century medicine draws to a close, you find yourself standing at the edge of a new world where healing arts will gradually transform into healing science. The transition will be neither quick nor easy, requiring centuries of additional discovery and countless brave individuals willing to challenge established wisdom in pursuit of better ways to understand and treat human suffering. The morning light grows warmer now, casting gentle shadows across this threshold between old and new, between faith and reason, between the medicine of yesterday and the promise of tomorrow. In this peaceful moment, as the world slowly awakens to new possibilities, you can rest knowing that humanity's journey toward understanding has begun in earnest, carrying with it the hope that future generations will suffer less and heal more through the courage of those willing to question, to observe, and to discover. Close your eyes now, and let the gentle rhythm of progress carry you into dreams where knowledge grows like morning light, slowly but surely illuminating the path toward wisdom.